Hay Festival.
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 Bienvenidos al podcast Hay Festival 2025, un espacio para imaginar otro mundo.
Bienvenidos al podcast 2025, la edición especial del podcast del Hay Festival en español, en la que celebramos el 20º aniversario de nuestro festival en Cartagena de Indias. Yo soy Catalina Gómez Ángel.
Y yo, Iñaki La Saetura. Para celebrar este momento único para nosotros, le pedimos a nuestros seguidores que nos enviaran las preguntas que consideraban eran claves para entender el mundo en el que vivimos.
Después de un largo ejercicio, nuestro equipo ha seleccionado las 20 preguntas más significativas y para responderlas reunimos algunas de las mentes más brillantes y más expertas en cada tema que participaron en la más reciente edición del Festival de Cartagena en enero del 2025. Empecemos, Iñaki.
Estamos con Susan Neiman, filósofa y escritora estadounidense. Ha escrito extensamente sobre ilustración, filosofía moral, metafísica y política. Es autora de 9 libros traducidos a 15 idiomas. El último, Izquierda no es woke, donde intenta explicar cuál es la confusión que lleva a que mucha gente haya dejado de sentirse de izquierdas. Welcome, Susan, to our podcast. Are there any better alternatives to democracy?
Social democracy, and these are very much not the same thing, because social democracy considers things like medical care, education, housing, fair labor practices to be rights that are just as much rights as the right to travel or the right to speak. And if cultures don't have those rights, then no wonder people feel incredibly frustrated. They vote every 4 or 5 years, and their lives don't fundamentally change. What just happened in the United States, people ascribe to inflation. And that's because most Americans don't have the vocabulary to describe what their lives are like in the absence of social rights. So yes, there is a better alternative, and social democracy, I'm putting the emphasis on the social as well as the democracy.
Are we arriving at the moment where people around the world, or in some countries, are giving up their civil rights in order to achieve greater economic security or safety?
I think part of the answer to that is the problem that I just named. That is, you talk about people giving up their civil rights. Most people don't feel their civil rights are worth very much. They are living by and large, with the exception of, let's say, a 10% on the top, they're living extremely difficult lives where they're concerned about merely getting by, where most people are afraid that their children will be, I don't mean worse off economically, although people worry about that as well, but worse off in every way, worse off in terms of having a perspective about the world. So yes, we are at a point where people feel resigned and as if within the current systems there isn't very much they can do, and so they might as well simply give up and enjoy peace and quiet and consumer goods. But it's a terribly dangerous mood to feed, and although I understand it very well, it's one that I think we need to fight against.
Susan, are we witnessing the end of the single Western narrative?
Well, I'm not sure there ever has been a single Western narrative. It depends on where you stand. I believe if you stand in, China or India, you have a very different narrative of history than you do if you were educated in some other places. But yes, I think this is actually a good thing. We're living at a time when people in the northern hemisphere feel less and less able to say, our narrative is the one that fits for everything. And this doesn't mean canceling the great Western writers by any means whatsoever. It just means adding to that narrative and enriching everybody's perspective by doing so.
And maybe also the interest about those other narratives, not like maybe some years ago it was, oh no, this Western narrative is like the great one, like to say it in a way. And then, of course, there are these ones in the periphery. Now we are bringing those from the periphery because there's a bigger interest or bigger scope there.
Yes, and I think that's actually wonderful, frankly. I know that I felt, and some of my friends, for example, I have Chilean friends who felt the same way that I did when they were growing up, that real history took place in Europe, and so first you have to learn European history before you can learn anything else. And I'm glad that we're coming out of that era. Again, I'm all for learning European history, but I'm also happy to, I feel my understanding of European history is enriched when I learn about African history or Indian history or whatever.
I've been watching your podcast and reading about left and walk and trying to understand. I just want to bring this subject, is a question from us, because you talk about something very important. It's about universal rights, universal wishes, education, health, human rights, security. But you also talk about this, our world becoming smaller and smaller in little groups.
Yes.
How can you, very briefly, explain to us why so many people are disappointed with the leftists, because this misunderstanding between universal and small groups?
I was talking last night to a 30-year-old from Britain. People were asking me questions about Germany and the rise of the right in Germany. And I started out answering, well, since 1991, we've gotten used to the idea that anything related, connected in any way to communism was the source of all evil. And this person looks at me, as if I'd said the sky was blue. We've learned that the sky was blue. And he said, yeah. We have been, since 1991, exposed to a narrative that there's only one form of socialism and that it leads straight to the gulag, okay? And of course, just as there are many forms of capitalism, there are many forms of socialism. After the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a lot of discussion about a third way and about non-aligned countries and about a peace dividend. We stopped spending all our money on weapons. And there was, between industry and government and popular culture, people were all convinced, if they hadn't grown up differently as I did, I'm the generation above this young, very bright man, that any form of socialism led straight to the gulag. And what that means is not only any form of socialism. Socialism is a universalistic philosophy, okay? It argues for universal human rights that are the basis of socialism, and then you can work out the details later. But once the idea that what we share as human beings is no longer a hope for universal justice, but the wish for the latest iPhone or car or whatever it is, people began to get smaller and smaller because that seemed to be the only thing that made sense. I don't know how long you want me to talk about this, but I think evolutionary psychology played an extremely pernicious role, and I talk about it in my book, Izquierda no es woke, because it convinced us that even at the genetic level, all we are and all we do are little, beings striving for more power. and that the idea that we might do something because we cared about justice is simply a mirage. And so you have a whole set of ideologies coming to fruition at the end of the 20th century, which has made us feel that universal consumerism is universal, but there's nothing else that is.
So those voices that used to link everything regarding socialism as Gulag, now they're using everything regarding about migration as it is a risk, it's a harassment, all the evil that will banish everything that is Western culture. Is there any way that we could invert that idea?
Look, it's a very old trick to blame all of your troubles on the other group, okay? And Donald Trump has just done that brilliantly and provided a brilliant example. The problem is that the real causes of migration are systemic and need to be addressed. You don't solve anything by putting immigrants in camps. You need to do two things. One is to combat climate change in a serious way. And the other thing that you need to do is to combat inequality. Now, this is going to sound utopian and unrealistic, but you could do both if you cut military budgets. One of my favorite facts is from Malala, the youngest Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who got famous for almost being killed in her struggle for girls to get an equal education. Everybody knows that on the planet. What people don't know is she used that education at a certain point to calculate that we could give 12 years of education to every girl and boy on the planet at the cost of 8 days of international military expenditures. 8 days. And when I heard this, I happened to be meeting with a Nobel laureate in economics. I said, can this possibly be true? He took out his paper and he made some calculations. He says, yeah, that sounds about right. So, once you realize that these are the sums involved, you realize that it would not actually be, the problem is not an absence of resources. That's not the problem. The problem is the way that they're divided and the fact that we don't know what mechanisms we could use to change that. I mean, every time I've mentioned that fact, people are astonished as I was. None of us know where and how to put the pressure to, move towards dividing resources and cutting military expenditures. But the more of us know that, the easier it will be to do something.
It's very sad because we are spending again more and more in defense and in arms. But thank you so much, Susan.
You're very welcome.
For being with us. The time is over, but thank you for being in this edition of the podcast of Hay Festival en español. Muchísimas gracias por estar en esta edición especial del podcast en español del Hay Festival. Imaginamos otro mundo.
Gracias por acompañarnos. Una producción de Ojo por Ojo Multimedia. Hay Festival 2025. Un espacio para que imaginemos otro mundo.